Waterford Wesleyan Church online. My name is Pastor Matt. I am the assistant pastor here at Waterford Wesleyan Church. And before we get into Pastor Paul's message, we've just got a couple quick announcements. It's almost the Easter season. It's almost Resurrection Sunday, a time for celebration as Jesus has come out of the tomb after his crucifixion, which means we have a couple quick announcements. The Thursday before Easter, that's the 1st of April, we are doing a Maundy Thursday communion service here at the church at 6:30. On Friday, we are doing our Tenebrae service starting at 6:30 for a time of reflection, and at 7 we are going to be starting the Tenebrae service. Now, this is a time of reflection. This is a time that it's going to be dark. It's going to be reflective. It's going to be dreary. It's going to be gloomy. It's going to be upsetting for some people. So, it's with that I give you this caveat. This might not be a service in which you bring your young children. I just want to throw that out there. But for the rest of us, it is a time to reflect on our own sin and what Christ did on that day when he was on the cross so many years ago, and what we will celebrate that Friday, which is April 2nd. And again, that's at 6:30 for a half-hour long time of reflection, and at 7 o'clock we will be beginning our service. And then on Sunday, as we celebrate the resurrected Christ, at 10:30 we are going to be doing a worship time, where if you come, we're going to be playing worship music. The worship team's going to be playing worship music, and it's just going to be a time of celebration leading into our normal Sunday service. So, all of that being said, you can go to our website at waterfordwc.com, and we ask that you register for the events that you are planning on attending. Again, please go to waterfordwc.com and register for those events that you plan on attending, just so we can get a rough number and stay within COVID regulations. We would really, really appreciate that. So, with all the announcements out of the way, here is Pastor Paul.
Over the course of the last year, you and I have had lots of restrictions placed upon our life due to the coronavirus pandemic. Things that once we never heard of now become common part of our language. Words like social distancing. Things like, well, you go to the store and leave your mask in the car. I'm famous for that one. Or things like, well, large gatherings are now no more. Schools are closed, and you can't go to a ball game or a hockey game or go to the theater. Your travel has been limited, and in some ways it feels like there's even almost like your privacy has been stolen, maybe. And for the most part, you and I and people have been living and following the rules and making this happen so we can get through this and get to the end of this and go back to whatever normal is going to be. And that's really where people have been moving. And then something happened, and things began to change. You may have not perceived it because it kind of happened slowly, but it happened just the same. And that's this. You had leaders in charge that would say things like, hey, we got to close down the barbershops and the hairstylists, and then you see video of them at the barbershop or the hairstylist getting their hair done, and it's all recorded on video, and you go, hey, wait a minute. Or you see the governor that closes down restaurants and says you can't eat inside, and you can eat outside, but you can't eat inside. And then you see video of him eating inside, and you go, hey, wait a minute. Or the school board member that says we have to keep schools closed, and then takes their child to the preschool outside their school district. And again, you're going, wait a minute, that doesn't add up. Or mask mandators not wearing masks, and on and on and on. And you start to ask the question, wait a minute, it's good for you, but it's not good for me. How does this all work? It's a little bit infuriating, that's for sure. Now here's the problem. My goal today is not to throw leaders under the bus. They don't need any help with that. But I want to point out to you how infuriating and irritating it can be when somebody says one thing and does another. We have a word for that, and that word is hypocrisy. You say, I'm going to live this way, and then you don't. And there's something in humans that just rubs us the wrong way, where you're like, that is not okay. And I want to tell you something. It's not just you that irritates. You just take a look at Jesus. Jesus has issues with people being hypocritical. Most of the time I see Jesus confronting people through the Gospels is when religious leaders aren't following their own rules. And if you want to see how sharp his tongue gets, just take a look at Matthew chapter 23, and you'll get a pretty good idea of how much business he really means. Now, on the other hand, when you have somebody that says, this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I believe, and then they follow it up with actions, there's a level of credibility that rises up with that person and in you. Let me give you an example, a simple example. If you were to go back to 1969, the first big game, the first football game that was called the Super Bowl, it wasn't the first Super Bowl, but the first one that was called the Super Bowl, was between two teams, the Baltimore Colts and the New York Jets. Now, the Colts were favored by 18 points. The Jets weren't even supposed to be on the same field with the Colts. And then something happens. A young quarterback with lots of swagger named Joe Namath said, I guarantee we're going to beat the Colts. People laughed him off. And lo and behold, Joe Namath and the New York Jets defeat the undefeatable Baltimore Colts. And that gave him credibility. He said one thing, and he followed it up. And you know how I know that gave him credibility? Because here we are 50 plus years later, and Joe Namath is still doing commercials for some Medicare Advance thing or something. I mean, it's amazing to me how much credibility he got because of, he said, I'm going to do this, and then he matched it with actions. It matters to you, and it matters to me. It's authenticity, it's credibility. Now, it's not just Joe Namath. Here's something even a little more valuable. Imagine we're going to do this little kind of fun game. Imagine with me, if you would, that if somebody said, hey, this is the way you should live your life. This is what you should do. This is how you should handle your money. This is the way you should handle your relationships. And then they said this. I'm going to hire a camera crew to follow me around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and stream my life, and you can watch everything that I do. You just log into like notahypocrite.com and follow everything that's going on in their lives. And you can watch them. Imagine that. Wouldn't that be kind of interesting, at least, if anything, for someone to say, I'm going to live my life this way, and then follow it up, and you get to watch it? That would be wild to me. Maybe I'm onto something here. I probably shouldn't have said that out loud. But anyway, that would be amazing. Because what would happen to you and to me is as if you log into this website, you begin to watch this live stream of a person that says they're going to live this way, and then you get to watch them do it, something's going to happen. You're going to start by watching that person as a skeptic, going, yeah, that's not going to pan out well for them. And then you may move to the place where you're like a cautious observer going, well, you know what? Maybe they are who they say they are. To the place where they keep going and they keep matching their words with actions, to a place where you're going to go, yeah, that's an authentic person. And your level of respect is going to rise for them. This matters. Living your life authentically matters in this world. Anyway, wouldn't that be refreshing? Wouldn't that be encouraging? Wouldn't that be impossible? Well, impossible, no, but encouraging, yes. And the reason I say it's not impossible is because Jesus did it. Jesus said, I'm going to live my life this way, and then he did. He matched his words and his actions. Now, you might be pushing back inside your mind and going, yeah, but that's Jesus. That's not me. That's not you. I mean, come on, it's Jesus. And rightfully so, you have a point there. But he's not the only one. Here's an example. Take a person that you admire. Just think about it. Maybe it's somebody from your childhood. Maybe it's someone from your workplace, from last week, from wherever. A person that you admire. Just take a moment and think about them. You got their picture of their face in your mind. Now let me ask you this one question about that person that you admire. My guess is they're authentic people. My guess is what they say they're going to do and what they say they believe match up when they live it out. You see, it is possible. And it is something that breeds credibility in a life. Now, it's not just limited to Jesus. It's not just limited to that person that's in your mind. This is throughout the years of following Jesus. You can find people who lived what they said they were going to do. And what we've been examining beginning last week and again this week, and we'll take another look next week at the life of Daniel. And we see this exact same thing in Daniel's life, where Daniel raised the bar, said, this is what I'm going to do. And then he even said, watch me. Watch me do it. And the reason we've been looking closely at Daniel is because Daniel lived in a culture that was very much opposed to his views. Matter of fact, it was actively trying to remove his heritage, actively trying to remove his understanding of God, even reshape it, and take away essentially everything that Daniel was. And you and I, especially here in the northeast part of the United States, live in a world similar. I mean, we're not there, but we certainly live in a world that is opposed to traditional Christian beliefs. I reminded you in last week's video that research came out about 10 years ago that ranked where we live here in the Capital District of New York as the most post-Christian place in America. Now, here over the course of the 10 years that went on from about 2009 to 2019, that same research went out again and moved us to spot number 6 on the 10 most post-Christian places in America here in the Capital District of New York, which is the right move. But in our northeast quarter of the United States where we live, 8 of the 10 most post-Christian cities in America are within a 4-hour drive of where I stand right now. So that means specifically to this area, we live in a world that is opposing Christian views. And that makes things a little difficult. So what we really began to unpack last week, and we're going to continue this week and again next week, is then how do you live out your faith in a world that is opposed to it? How do you live out the unpopular view of following Jesus in a popular world? And what we began to discover is this: we take what we learn and we apply it to our lives, and that will give us authenticity. And we began to learn from Daniel last week how to live out this unpopular view in a popular world. And we're going to go back to Daniel chapter 1, go through that again, and then do a quick recap, and then pick up on a whole new reality of what Daniel does to live his faith out in a difficult world. So if you have a Bible with you, I'm going to encourage you to grab it, open it up to Daniel chapter 1. Otherwise, it's going to be here on the screen in front of you. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were trained there for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel he gave the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now, God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please, test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to do this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away the choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of his time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. A quick recap before we get into what we're going to learn this week, and that's this. Daniel chose and lived a life of resolve. He decided who he was and what he would and would not do before that temptation or challenge was placed before him. He resolved in his heart not to eat the king's royal food, and that is a reminder that he decided that before it was placed in front of him. He made that decision long before what he was going to do. And he had that resolve to hold steady and to hold hard to his belief system. And he held on to his God and his resolve before the challenge was placed in front of him. In addition to that, he did that coated in grace. You see, because when you hold on to your resolve, there could be a part where you kind of become a jerk about it. It wouldn't be hard to get there, where you almost become defensive and even angry about holding on to your resolve. But Daniel coated it with grace. When you see how he used manners, and he literally used the word please, and he spoke with those that were over him in a way that wasn't aggressive, and he's just kind of letting them know, like, hey, if you would work with me here, I'd really appreciate that. And they did. And what we learned about Daniel and living out his life of this unpopular view in a popular world, what we learned about him is this, that he had resolve and grace. And so for you and me, it's really, we need to make decisions before we face the challenge, before we face the difficulty, before we face the temptation. Know what you will and won't click on before you open your laptop. Know how much you will spend before you go to the market. Decide how you are, what you will and won't do when you go to that party. You get it. You decide that beforehand. This is who I am. And you do that with grace and gentleness. Now, that brings us up to today, this week, examining Daniel living this life out in a difficult culture. And what I want you to note is this. Daniel was completely comfortable with people examining his life. He was really okay with saying, hey, I'm going to live this out and you can watch. Matter of fact, I encourage you to watch. Look at what he says in Daniel chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. He says, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Test me, examine me, watch what you see. Observe what I do. Look, Daniel's life here in this moment, it's all about credibility. Daniel was not afraid for others to examine his life, and he even invited people to do so. Daniel was not worried that he'd be found out. He was not, because he wasn't taking the king's royal food when no one was looking, sneaking out the back door and eating it. He said, this is who I am. And you can watch me, you can observe me, you can examine me. That's refreshing. That's refreshing for the people then, and it's refreshing right up to this day. He did what he said he would do. And I said before, Jesus did it, that person you admired did it, Daniel did it, but it doesn't end there. The Apostle Paul also instructs us very much the way Daniel just did. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Daniel nor the Apostle Paul were afraid to be the example. Paul says, look at me, follow me. I want to follow Jesus and you can follow me. It's an amazing thing when you really think about that he was willing to put himself out front. So that begs the question, how about you? Do you live your life out front where people know what you believe and then you live it out before them? Do you live what you say you believe? I mean, that's a pointed question. Question I must ask myself. Do I live what I say I believe? A question that we should ask ourselves regularly, for sure. And a way to know if you're willing to allow somebody to follow you around with cameras, just think about it that way. If you're willing to do that, if you're willing to step out there and put yourself out in front where you could take shots, if you're willing to do that and go, yeah, I'm okay with that, then you know you're in the right place. You know your words and your actions are certainly matching up. And it's so important in a world that is opposed to the teachings of Jesus to live it out authentically. Because what I want you to note is this. The other side of that is Daniel never told them to believe what he believed. He just held true to who he was through resolve, with grace, and said, watch me, examine me. He never was saying, you got to believe like I believe. He just lived it out for them. I mean, that's a really big statement then, to realize that you say, I'm going to live this way. Now you go ahead and watch me. Daniel was okay with his life being on display because he was authentic. He was perfectly cool with that. The resolve with grace and go ahead and examine me. That's Daniel's life. In a world that rejects and mocks the teachings of Jesus, authenticity gives incredible credibility. When you follow up your words and your actions and they mirror each other, there is an authenticity that comes to your life and blesses you, and it's an authenticity that comes to that people also are blessed by. And it honors Jesus Christ when we live our faith out before the world. Following Jesus might not be popular, but it certainly is attractive when you live what you say you're going to believe. People respect authenticity, and people will respect how your convictions of following Christ. And notice this. There's another part that I want you to notice, and that it may have even shocked Daniel when he lived out his faith and said, go ahead and watch me. And that's this. He wasn't just different from everybody else. He was better. Take a look at Daniel chapter 1, verse 15. It says, at the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. What the people saw and tested him and examined him was he was an improvement over the others. He was better. What I see that is God just blessing Daniel. It didn't mean he's a better person. He just was in a better position, in a better condition. This is God's blessing on Daniel, clearly, for him to see and the world to see around him. Now, I want you to note, just because God blesses you doesn't mean your life's perfect, okay? That's not what I'm talking about here. But there is a difference when we live our life out for Christ and we live it out and our words and our actions match. There is a blessing that we carry. There's a confidence that you carry because you know you're in God's will, even when it is difficult. And in this particular time in Daniel's life, it was difficult. But yet he improved and he was better. It was God's hand of blessing in his life. And he'll do the same for you when you live your life out that way here and now. Now look, we have plenty of examples in our world of people who say one thing and do another. We began this time together kind of pointing that out. That's not hard to find. You can find it at work. You can find it in your own family. You can find it with your friends on Facebook. You're like, that's not who they are. You can find it anywhere. When people are not who they say they are, that's not hard to find. And the outcome, well, you usually end up with a low opinion of them, and you're like, you kind of disregard what their words may be. But I want you to note this. I'm not talking about those people. And I'm not talking to those people. I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to me. When I address this question, do my words and do my actions, do they match up? For we must live what we say we believe. Must. If not, there is no credibility. And the idea of following Jesus for the people around you is less than appealing. On the other hand, when a person resolves to hold to their convictions with grace and says, go ahead and watch me, that's inspiring. It's inspiring to me when I see that lived out. It's life-changing for you and for the people around you. You will be a blessing for them. In Daniel's example, Paul's example, and the example of the person that I had you place in your mind, that picture of that person in your mind, is the example that you and I need to have to set for our family, for our coworkers, for our friends. To just live out what we say we're going to believe. Because when our words and actions match, it breeds credibility. So for us, for myself, at least I'll speak for myself, I make a habit, to the best of my ability, to examine my words and my actions and ask myself that pointed question, do they match up? Am I who I say I am? Do I live what I say I believe? And if I never quite know the answer to that question, then I follow that up with, would I be willing to let people follow me around with a camera and watch everything I do? Because if I've got things hidden in the corner of my life, then I'm starting to move down the wrong road. Authenticity. Living your life out. Living what you say you believe and then living it out breeds authenticity. And in a world that may be opposed to what you believe, even if they're opposed, it certainly makes following Jesus attractive and breeds authenticity and credibility to the gospel message.
As we close our time together, let's close in a word of prayer. Would you please bow your heads with me? Lord, we thank you for who you are, and we thank you for being the perfect authority. You are perfectly authentic. You say what you're going to do in your word and in our lives, and then you do it. Lord, I pray that as Christ did, I pray that we seek after this authenticity, that we worship a loving God who calls us to be loving ourselves. And so, Lord, I pray that we go and do that. I pray that we practice what we preach. I pray that we be a perfect witness to what you would have us do, so that we are a testament to the love that you are. Lord, I pray that our actions and our hearts in our family and our friends and in our workplaces are not a hindrance to your word, but rather a big arrow pointing towards you. Lord, I pray this for myself. I pray this for this church, and I pray this for everybody watching here. I pray that our words and our actions line up, because in a world that can oppose you, we do not need to be another stumbling block. Lord, I pray that we pave the path towards you, be a conduit for you, for your love always. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you for joining us here online. If you'd like to join us in person on a Sunday morning, we just ask that you go to waterfordwc.com and register for our 11 o'clock service. And again, next month, the 1st, the 2nd, and the 4th, we are having Monday, Thursday, Tenebrae service, and then Resurrection Sunday celebration service. And we ask that you register for those if you plan on attending. So, God bless, and until next time, have a good week.